Diane. Hi, everyone. My name is Kylie Borgeli. I am the founder of InnoCrew, which is a founder community here in Boston. We do a ton of events and other things around the communities to support founders here with an emphasis on authentic conversations. So similar to what we're talking about today. I am delighted to be here moderating this panel. This is my first time moderating a panel, so please bear with me. It is a learning process, but I will go ahead and let the panelists introduce themselves. And just to give you guys an idea of the formatting, I hope that this conversation today is very, it just flows well. And please hold your questions until the end. We will have about 15 minutes for those.
Thank you, Kylie. It's working? Great. Thank you, Kylie. My name is Rade Bogavac. Rade is how you pronounce it. I own a travel company and a marketing company. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Diane Hessen. I did my first company in Boston at around 2000, and I've built a couple of others since. The biggest company that I built was called Communispace. We started in 2000. We raised about 20 million and scaled it to about 700 employees in 12 countries, and then sold that. And then I did a couple more companies. Now I'm mostly sitting on corporate boards and supporting lots of startups in the city of Boston.
Hi there. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Guys, I want to apologize. I'm at a WeWork and the internet shut down about 10 minutes ago. And so the entire WeWork just vacated. And so I am using my hotspot. So thank you for bearing with me. My name is Tap. I am the founder and managing partner of an executive search firm called Plenty Search. We work with early stage companies, typically Series A through Series C, to help them find their executives. We typically partner with venture capital firms like Sequoia, Khosla, First Round, and so really integrated in the startup community. Prior to this, I spent time at Google. I was at Airbnb during a period of fast growth, and I scaled 2 startups after that. I hope you heard that.
Yes, we can hear you. We can't see you. The AV team might be able to fix that before we move on. Okay, great. Sorry about that. We'll have them up soon. Okay. I will go ahead and get started with the first question. So as a founder myself, I know that delegating can be kind of a daunting thing to consider doing, especially if you've started your company yourself. How do you go about that and figuring out what to delegate, who to delegate it to, how much to delegate?
Thank you. So being on multiple teams and and owning many companies with my personal experience, I've learned that the most important thing when it comes to delegation is teaching those people that you delegate to the responsibility you're giving to them. I reached the point where I needed to delegate things when I was on getting close to a burnout with the amount of work I was taking on myself. This happened in the past, and I just needed support. So based on the amount of work I had to find people I trust to give that responsibility that was my burden, that was on my back, and it was my idea that I was carrying, and I had to give it to them. And it's a tough choice to make, but I've learned that through making a lot of mistakes to get to the right people. There's no clear formula how much to delegate or who to delegate. I would say that mistakes kind of create a path to getting to the right people who will be there to take that responsibility from you and carry your idea on.
And Diane, I'm really curious to hear from you in particular, because I know that you've led teams of many, many people. How did you navigate that process of growing your company and bringing on new people and communicating your vision and ensuring that as you were delegating, your vision maintained itself and didn't get lost?
Okay, so let me go back to my assumption here is that most of you are very early stages. So is that true that most of you have just a couple of people in your companies, or no? Some people saying no. I mean, let me give you one example outside of being an entrepreneur. I was an executive in a company about 25 years ago. And my team did an intervention with me and said, Diane, if you don't get an executive assistant, we're going to quit. And I'm saying, oh, I don't need that. That's like a prima donna thing. We don't have the budget. I'd rather spend the money elsewhere. Why do you think I need somebody? And what I learned is that I needed somebody because there was stuff that I was awful at, like scheduling meetings and figuring out my travel and everything. People needed me to do higher level stuff, and I didn't have unlimited time. And when I brought that assistant in, it changed everything about my ability to lead, to run that division and everything else. And I bring that one up just because that happens all the time as you're building a company. You get to a point where if you're doing everything, it's fine. But there's only one problem, which is you can't grow your organization unless you get some leverage from other people. So I can't remember who said it, but like being well-rounded is, not a great thing. It's called figuring out what are you really great at, and then how do you bring other people in who will leverage you and have you spending your time doing higher level things and focusing on the stuff that you want to do the most. And I think that's what it comes down to. In the very beginning, what I very often will talk to entrepreneurs about is, you think about there's like an inside person and an outside person in your company. The outside person is selling business, creating partnerships, talking to potential investors. They're doing things outside the building, figuratively. The internal person is making the donuts. They're running the ship, they're writing code, they're making sure that everything works, they're ensuring that we have enough cash, they're doing the numbers, etc. And the easiest way to do it in the beginning is to say, am I an outside guy or an inside guy? And then hire somebody. If I'm the outside person, then find somebody to keep everything running and creating the metrics and doing everything like that so that you can be actually out there, or vice versa. So it's really a matter of just figuring out how you get as much leverage as possible. Now, the second part is, how do you actually have the courage to do that?
Yeah,
and to translate your vision?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think the scary thing about bringing other people in for me was always, number one, they're not going to care as much as I do. Number two, they're not going to work as hard as I do. And number three, they're not going to really get the vision and be able to pull it off the way I would. And what I will tell you is the first two are true. You're just not, if you are the founder, you're not going to find anybody who cares as much as you do. Just don't look for it. And you're not going to find somebody who works as hard as you do, although you can screen for, if somebody comes in and you're interviewing them and you're working 24/7 and the first question they ask you is, how's work-life balance here? That's probably not going to be a good fit, right? So you can do some of that, but people don't necessarily care as much. But you can help people get excited about what you're up to and what's possible in the future. And I think that's the part that, you got to be really clear about articulating that. It's very good exercise to have your elevator speech done, but practicing an elevator speech on potential employees is great. And, it doesn't mean you don't have to talk about it every single day. People forget and they'll say, well, why are we doing this again? Why do we need to grow? Why do we need to be a bigger company? You need to talk about it all the time. But when you bring people on board, the most important thing you've got to do is to make sure that they can demonstrate to you that they kind of get it and that they're as excited about everything as you are.
Thank you so much for
Can I-
sharing. I think a big thing that you touched on there too is that you have to trust the people. And I think instilling that trust and really being able to rely on them and not get stuck in this mindset of it's so much easier to just keep doing everything myself because I know exactly what I want and what I want it to look like. Rod and Tack, I'm really curious to hear if you guys struggled with that when you started, building your team and learning how to effectively delegate. Was that something that you struggled with at all?
Can I, can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Yes,
Can I add on to what Diane said before
absolutely.
we move on? Because
Yeah.
I loved the point she made. I wish I was there in person, by the way. I immediately am feeling like I can I'm feeling the energy from Diane and Rod. I think I loved everything she said. I would add one thing, which is not only what your superpower is, right? What you're good at, which is something that I think she said really eloquently, but also what you're uniquely suited to do in your role. So you might be an amazing marketer and probably could write slightly better, marketing emails than your marketing manager. And yes, like that would add value. But as the founder, as the CEO, you're the only person who can sell the company to prospective candidates, own executive hiring, talk to investors, and that is work that even if you have amazing strengths in other skills, there are probably other people who could do that work, but there are things in your role that are really, really unique to you, and being really clear on what those things are, because no one can replace those responsibilities but you.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, thank you so much. Did you ever struggle with the fear of losing control of your vision while you were communicating your needs?
Yeah, I'll take that one first. All the time. I also I loved everything Diane said. Something that was said to me a few years ago that really stayed with me was, Tack, if everyone was as, insert adjective, passionate, excited, hardworking, blah blah blah, as you, they would go start their own company. Right. And that and I realize that those are unfair expectations to ask of everyone. Sure, you might have your one or two superstars that you're grooming to, help run the company with you, but the majority of employees aren't compensated to do that. They're not incentivized to do that. It's not realistic. And so to answer your question more directly, I think that I'm in constant fear because I just don't think anyone cares, or most people don't care as much as I do. But I remember that like I can't have the same expectations of everyone else as I do of myself. Having said that, I think the sign of a great leader is someone who paints a very clear vision. If you ask everyone on your team, like, what does success look like? What are we trying to achieve? What value are we trying to add to our customers in 12 months? If we were successful, what would have resulted? If people can't answer that, then that probably means that you haven't set a very clear vision and you haven't set guardrails for people. So I think that's a good place to start. Like, have you done the work to set very clear expectations for everyone so that you don't have to micromanage them? And I know that's a topic we'll go into later.
Yeah, actually, that's a perfect segue into micromanaging. I think it can be really hard. Like I said, I think in the beginning, especially if you're a solo founder, it's really easy to get into this mindset of it's easier to just keep doing everything myself. It's not going to get messed up. You trust yourself. How do you make sure that you aren't micromanaging? And how do you, like, what types of systems are you putting in place to alleviate and manage that? And anyone can feel free to jump in here.
I'll jump in. So I tend to be a perfectionist. So
Same.
that I know that people can do things the way I imagine them to be done, or that they can do it the way I imagined. The thing is about that is letting go. That's what I learned. I learned that people do things differently. Having a wide amount of people that you work with, like different teams, there are different mindsets, there are different individuals, and nobody can do things the same. So I just realized in the system that I put in is just to struggle that feeling, and it hurts at the beginning. It just like hurt knowing that I'm giving somebody else the obligation to do something that I would have done better. But it's just how growth works. And if I haven't done that, and if I haven't implemented that feeling of letting go of things, and letting other people be responsible for what they're responsible for, the growth would not happen. So managing is kind of a cancer to growth. And in order to do that, we just have to learn to let go. So I'm going to give you a clear example of that is like my son got born last year, and we all talk about how our businesses are our babies, and it really relates to being a parent. There's fear and anxiety every single day. Like whether everything's under control, you still think about it. That's how we treat our businesses. And I know that from the moment came where my child needed to learn how to walk, and I let go of his hand because he's not going to learn otherwise. So that's going to cause even more trouble if I'm constantly there holding his hand. So letting go would be my point of view as a solution.
I think this is really about a decision that you have to make. I think you have to decide whether you want to have a big company or not. If you want to grow your company, you have to let go. I mean, you got to look in the mirror in the morning and say, I'm not that great. I'm not the best person in the world at absolutely everything that has to get done in this company. If you can't do that, you will have what for me was always the worst possible outcome, a nice little business. If you want a nice little business, don't worry about it. Like, do everything. Do everything, be a perfectionist, bring a couple of low-level people in who can just kind of keep you sane, micromanage them like crazy, and you'll be fine. But if you're trying to really build an enterprise that matters, you have to convince yourself that it's an enormous weakness to not be able to let go. And it doesn't mean it's not hard in the beginning, but once you practice that, just like going out and working out in the gym, and the first time you go, it's harder and harder and harder. Once you practice that and get great at it, it's actually incredibly freeing to look around a table and know that you have a team full of a bunch of people who are making things happen even when you're not there. I remember once, one day I'm sitting in my office, and one of the people on my leadership team comes walking in with a younger employee, and he says to me, "Diane, could you do me a favor?" Jamie was her name, and she was phenomenal. She says, "Jamie doesn't," this is when we have, I don't know, probably about 50 people, but he was like my number 2 person. He says, "Diane, Jamie doesn't really understand the strategy and where we're going. Could you talk to her about it?" So he brings her in, and we talk about the thing. And 7 minutes later, she walks out the door, and he says, "Thank you." And I said, in the office, back in here. We closed the door, and I said to him, "What was that? Like, you know the strategy, you know the direction of the company and everything." He says, "Well, but you're better at it than I am." And I thought, oh my gosh, if I can't get to the point where he and people like him can't motivate people like Jamie and get her clear on what's going on, then that's going to be an obstacle to our growth. And I just gave you that one example because I think if you want to build something that's really, really scaling, you've got to start practicing that mindset, just the way you practice doing push-ups. Is just, where are the situations in which your inability to have somebody else do something that maybe you can do better, or that maybe you used to do yourself? You got to be not only comfortable with that, you got to be thrilled about it, because you know that that's your opportunity to do other things that are just going to have a lot more leverage. So I think you have to fall in love with letting go.
Can I add here too?
Please, yes.
This is probably the single question that I am most passionate about. I could spend 3 hours talking about this topic because I made so many mistakes. I've seen so many founders make mistakes here. I'll try to be quick, but I have a couple of points. The first one is founders, and I'm one too, so I'm putting myself in this category, have extremely bad reputations. Like people don't like to work with founders. Like there's a lot of narcissistic founders, egotistical founders, stubborn founders. We there, and it's for a reason, right? Like I think the three of us here all share like we're perfectionists, we care so much. And so having said that, and it's coming from a good place, but having said that, it makes us hard people to work for if we don't learn this muscle, build this muscle of like letting go, delegating, empowering, right? Like that's what we're really striving for. I think and for the founders who do build this muscle, they out hire, they out retain, they build better teams, and they will have an advantage and be more successful. I think some tactical things. Rod, I totally agree with what you said. That like it's important to delegate. As like from my own experience, the reason why it's difficult sometimes is because you don't. It's hard when you don't have the right person. So it starts with making sure you have a very rigorous recruiting process, and that could be a whole another topic, and we can go into that. But like first and foremost, nothing's going to work if you don't have people who are qualified, competent, and that you trust. That's the first thing. And if you're finding yourself repeatedly questioning them, questioning their judgment, then this might not be the right person to do this job. Let's assume that you have hired the right person, though. Hiring the right person is only half the battle. I have so many examples of hiring amazing executives. There's one actually that comes to mind. This incredible CMO where I placed her at this startup and she was just being micromanaged. Like the founder thought that he knew better than her on brand, on acquisition, and it didn't last very long. 10 months later, she left the company. She went on to join another company that we placed her at, and she's at that company, crushed it, has been promoted 3 times, and is now has a role where she's overseeing marketing, operations, customer success, a variety of functions. And it's because she has a founder and leader now who like empowers her, trusts her. And so making sure like that's the same person, wildly different outcomes depending on the environment and culture. And the example that I like to use is like in order to delegate, like have you set really clear expectations? An example being, let's pretend that what you're hungry and you want food, right? One person might choose to eat hamburgers, and you might choose to have sushi. The both satisfy the same outcome, but it's at the end of the day, it's like a preference thing. And so maybe you didn't want just food, maybe you wanted Asian food, maybe you wanted a specific type of food. That's actually not as good an example as I thought it would be in my mind, but creating systems where like it's where you set a clear what a clear goal is, and they can take whatever avenue they want to take. And I think OKRs are actually a really good system for this. If anyone's looking for like a specific technique or tool to use, because I think that was one of your questions, Kylie.
Yeah, I thought of another tactic when you were talking tech that it reminded me of. Like one thing to do is catch yourself when you're doing a really bad job delegating. So when you find yourself micromanaging, what are the moments? And one place where I was always micromanaging was when we had a sales team and they were going out to make a presentation for a big proposal for a client. So what would they do? They'd come to me the day before the presentation and they'd do a practice run with me. And while I was listening, like I thought, oh my gosh, I hate every slide. I don't like the way they're doing it. I think they've got the wrong strategy and everything. And and I'm thinking, I need to be nice about this. And of course, I look down and my mouth is moving and I'm telling them that it's not working. And I just see them completely deflated. And of course, honestly, if I think about those situations now, my guess is that what I was telling them was really good advice. It's just that then they had to stay up till midnight, totally redoing everything. So maybe the presentation went well, but I was exhausting people. And I finally realized that the only way that I could delegate well in that situation, because I thought it was a place where I had some talent, was I would say to people, do not ever do this to me again. Don't come to me the night before. Let's sit down a week or 2 weeks before you have the presentation and talk a little bit about strategy. What are you going to do? Because that's where I can be helpful. I don't want to sit here and make you all miserable and exhausted the night before. So I learned that I could delegate if I had control before, they made a mess. And that I wouldn't, because being really great at that presentation was completely unhelpful to all of us. I felt guilty. They're exhausted. They probably had great deck and did a lousy job on the presentation because they were so tired. So catch yourself when you're micromanaging. It doesn't mean you're never going to do it, but think about what are those situations and how do I come up with a solution?
That brings me to my next question that I've been thinking about. We've talked a lot about letting go, trusting the person, empowering whoever you're delegating to. How much of a foot do you keep in the door of projects? How often are you communicating with people that you're delegating to? How often are you meeting with them to make sure that things are, on track? And in the eyes of you who have been doing it all on your own, making good progress. How often are you meeting with them? Or are you kind of letting them take charge and, like you had said, meeting with them the day before, which seems to not be the most effective?
Somebody else want to take it?
We'll give it to you.
I like stand-ups. I don't know how you do that now because I'm not running a company that's totally remote, but I used to love, like, every Tuesday morning, I just get together with people. We'd meet for a half hour. I used to have one page that had all of our metrics, and I knew what we were measuring and what was going on that week, and therefore what the critical projects were. And we would just, having a ritual like that doesn't feel like micromanaging. It's just every Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, we have a stand-up. That's what we're doing. We're looking at the numbers. We're looking at how we are. It's great because you're running the company on a weekly basis. And, everybody puts their 2 cents in. If you're a really small company and you're all in the same room together, you're going to talk to people every day. You're going to talk to people every hour and say, what's going on? And you have to hope that, they're going to be asking you questions, more than you're going to be hovering over them or whatever else. But I think it also depends. If it's a tech team and you're all writing code, you're talking to each other all the time. That's a lot different from actually trying to run the company where you have people with different functional responsibilities who are trying to get their work done. I don't think you want to interfere every day, but you want to check in every week and you want to see how your numbers are going.
Yeah, I really like the idea of doing something weekly because I think it provides an opportunity of we meet, like, it's regular, they know what to expect. And I think that gives them an opportunity to communicate their needs and things that are going well, things that aren't, and how you can support them further too. So, sorry, I'm just trying to. So I guess this kind of leans into culture a bit. How do you maintain the culture of your company and connectivity when everyone's working on different things? And yes, you could do it, with a weekly meeting, but are there any other things that you implemented, as you delegated things?
I'll jump on this one, I guess. I would say that first you need to establish connectivity and culture in any company, and then you base off of that how you maintain it. Here's an example that's gonna explain all of that. So let's say we have open communication in our company. Everybody knows what's happening, all of the projects, so everybody can be involved if needed, and we keep communication as open as possible. And so that everybody knows what our expectations are, and what they have to do. And we have these, let's say, bi-weekly meetings. I have bi-weekly meetings with chief of operations, head of marketing, and head of sales, and I meet with them bi-weekly. They have weekly meetings with their reports, and I do sometimes jump on these meetings, and I hear out people. I hear out their ideas, and I had one of my employees bring in an idea 7 months ago that we've acknowledged a week ago. But we heard her. We wrote that down, what she said 7 months ago, so she can understand that she's heard. Although at that moment, that idea made no sense, but we said, okay, we'll just like discuss it some other time. It's a great idea, but it's not for this time frame. But we brought that up 7 months later so she can know that she's acknowledged in our company, that we don't disregard what any team member has to say at any certain point. So first is establishing that trust through open communication, and then building it and maintaining it by showing appreciation for the efforts of each individual.
Well, I think I mentioned this before, but I'm just a big believer in ritual. You know, I mean, if somebody were coming into your company and they said to you, well, what's it like to work here? You know, I wanted that to be a really easy question for people to answer. I wanted people to be able to say, well, here's what it's like here. Here's, you know, and think about just the elements of your culture. What do we wear? What's the energy level like? How hard do people work? You know, is it okay to use profanity? Right? Are people wearing shorts? Do we go out and have drinks together? Do we, you know, all of that? And I think figuring all that out is one of the most fun things about being a founder, because, you know, that can kind of permeate through the entire organization. So, and it can be little things. So we had things like when we get a new piece of business, no matter when it was, we'd have an ice cream party. I mean, it was literally, we would have an ice cream party and we would talk about the customer and we'd put their logo up, and we had a whole ritual where, you know, we'd take the logo and we'd put it up on a wall and all of those things. We had a thing where I can't even remember how it started, but like whenever a new employee came, we would we'd have a staff meeting, even if there are, you know, a few people in the company. We have this new employee, and I remember we hired somebody who was like our 6th employee, and the person went to Juilliard. He was a software engineer, but he went to Juilliard and he was an opera singer. So I brought him into this first staff meeting and I said, Jose, you know, we have a tradition here at Communispace, which is when a new employee comes in, we have a choice. Either you can sing us a song, and then I kind of took a beat, and then I said, or we can sing you a song. And no one knew that he was an opera singer other than me. So he sang this unbelievable song. Everybody goes crazy and all that. But what we did after that is every single time a new employee came in, we did the same thing. We'd say, you can sing us a song or we'll sing you a song. And most of the time we'd sing them a song. I mean, you know, you could sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game or, you know, whatever else. It didn't have to be this big impressive thing. But sometimes people would come in, and even if they didn't go to Juilliard, they'd go crazy. And it was fun because it was a way to bring somebody in and, you know, what was your song or whatever. But we had lots of rituals like that, lots of things where, you know, we do this once a month. We do this on Friday afternoons. We do this recognition thing at the end of every employee meeting. Like, come up with ideas for things that you can do again and again and again, because culture, that's what culture is early on. It's not about Googling great values and saying, here are some great values and let's do all of them, because in the beginning, you're not big enough to really understand, you know, all of that and kind of institutionalize your values. But, you know, doing fun ritual things that are distinct about your organization, that have a story behind them, I think makes a big difference. The other thing that really helped me, I'll tell you, there's a book called Culture.com by Robert Stringer that is all about startups and how you build culture. And I really recommend that book, and I'm married to the author. But my husband went out and he interviewed, he's been a culture expert for 1,000 years, but he went out and he interviewed like 100 people about how you build great cultures in startups. And there are a million ideas in there, and you can probably find pieces of it online, you know, without buying the book. But I think celebrating things and figuring out, you know, what you're going to do all the time one particular event happens is a really fun way to build things and keep people connected, especially remotely.
I feel like especially in the early days, it's good because it gets your team excited about working with you. And I think it connects them more to the mission because, like you said, it like kind of plays off of what the company is about as a whole. which is really great.
Can I add something here, Kylie?
Yeah.
Culture is a really interesting topic because number one, it's extremely nebulous, and I think it's something that everyone at some point as an employee or founder have sort of like struggled with, and I think it's for this reason. Number one, sometimes people conflate culture with like people getting along or employee happiness, engagement. Those things are really, really important. But to me, culture is who like what are the unique attributes that make someone belong at this company and would make them not belong at another company. A way to think about it is if you thought about your culture, whether you want to go through the exercise of creating core values or not at Plenty, even though we're just 18 people we have, because I have an HR background, so it's something that I've always really believed in, and I think is a very powerful tool in building companies. Or if you just want to keep it more informal and sort of think about who works, who doesn't work, it should be something that differentiates you. It should be something where it's a tool to help identify who doesn't belong here and who does belong here. And I'll give you a specific example. We hired a recruiter to join my company where she was very smart, had a great background, worked at LinkedIn and some other really sexy companies. Like this woman was smart. She was good at what she did. That much was clear. But but she did not like work wasn't really important to her. Like she wanted to do good work, but at 5 or 6 p.m., she wanted to close her laptop and not worry about it until the next morning. Like that was the type of place she wanted to work in. And although she was smart, although when she was on, she was very good, I realized that she was not the right fit for us because like we're a small company, like we're a startup. We need people who are just like, well, it's 9 o'clock on a Friday night, but there's a really important client thing that came up. I'm gonna do it. And so even though she was very smart, the team liked her. She got along with everybody. Actually, it was very, very hard for the team when we eventually let her go because she did get along with everyone so well on a like emotional level. She wasn't the right culture fit for us. She wanted a 9 to 5, and we're a culture where like one of our values is be accountable. And I realized after the fact that that didn't embody her, and that was a big learning lesson. And we've been very careful to identify that moving forward in hires because it was a mishire and it did set us back by quite a bit.
That was going to be my next question. You've talked a lot about this, Tak. In terms of hiring and identifying the correct people for your company, are there particular questions? And I don't want to get too much into like the hiring process and like your interview questions, but are there particular things that you're looking for, when you're hiring somebody for a startup that their role is going to be taking on a lot of what you personally are working on?
Yeah, so I'm gonna draw upon my Google experience here. Google was the most data-driven, had the most data-driven HR function I've ever worked with in my career. They literally have scientists on staff who are studying who's good, who's not good, who's a high performer, who's not a high performer, what are the attributes, competencies, what can we learn from all this information. And by far and away, the most important attribute is what we call general cognitive ability. It's a nice way of saying like how smart is someone. How and I define smart this way because I think that's also a nebulous word. How good are they at problem solving? How good are they at identifying problems, taking taking ambiguous problems, structuring them, identifying solutions. So it's around logic, it's around IQ, right? It's around like being able to use data to make good, strong, sound decisions. We found that people with high cognitive ability would consistently outperform people who had a ton of domain expertise. Consistently outperform people who are, like really driven, really passionate. Like that is by far the most important thing. And I have made a mistake. I'm embarrassed to even say this because despite the fact that I know that that is so important, I've made mistakes at Plenty today where I hired a person who's just like, I don't think they're the smartest person. Like I asked them a couple of questions and they kind of gave me like surface level answers and it didn't really feel like they like fully understood the question, didn't really feel like they dove into it. But I was still, I mishired because they were extremely hardworking. I mishired because they're so passionate. I mishired because they were a domain expert. Like they've been doing this for so long and like came from great companies. And so again, hiring is a topic that I think we can spend a whole hour talking about. But if I had to choose just one lesson from my company building, it's that nothing replaces intelligence, grit, passion, like EQ, like those things are all incredibly nice things to have, but there has to be a foundation of, is this a very smart, intelligent person? Because that's not replaceable.
So that's really interesting because you're the expert in recruiting. But I will tell you that my experience is very different from that. I feel like smart's a dime a dozen. You know, that most people I talk to are smart enough. So what I look for, and some of this is related to culture, maybe it probably depends on the kind of business you're building. I mean, if you're building an AI company and you need really brilliant data scientists and everything, I think that would be different. But I'll tell you, I always look for 4 things because I figured everybody was, you could look at their resume and know, like, did they go to a decent school or, whatever else. One is grit. And I particularly define that as what's their work ethic like. And I used to say to people, if you're out in the soccer field with your kid and you get a text from a client and it's a Saturday afternoon, what are you going to do? And if the person said, I will call them first thing Monday morning, we're done. We're done because of the nature of my business. Now, they didn't have to say, I'm going to miss everything, but at least they have to say, I'll text the client and say, I'm on the soccer field. Can I call you later? How urgent is this? I mean, at least I wanted to get something like that. So, just is the person really going to work hard? The second is tolerance for ambiguity. So in a startup, the thing that drives you crazy is an employee going, where's my job description? What do you want me to do now? What do you want me to do now? What do you want me to do now? So the ability to not freak out when your job is unclear, when your job is changing, or when the company pivots, I think is the second one. The third is just ability to collaborate and work well with others. And that also means it's not about me. Like it's not me all the time, but how are you thinking, about the company and the team? And then I wrote down one other here. Oh, and learning. So sometimes people come in and they're so smart that they're waiting for everybody to come ask them questions, but you want them to ask questions. You want them to be curious about the business, curious about other people, curious about your business model, how things are working. So I found those were important. I always thought everybody was smart enough. They just didn't have those other things. So maybe it depends on the kind of company you have.
Can I add to that? Because I can see, I like that we're having a fun, friendly debate. I actually agree with everything you said. The like smart alone will not get the job done. There's a lot of smart people, and if they don't have grit, like they're gonna fail. I was sort of trying to simplify the answer a little bit because, in my opinion, startups are very hard, and you need a lot of ingredients to be successful, right? So, like I in my opinion, intelligence and like an extremely critical thinker is the most important ones, but I think every single attribute you listed, Diane, is important. And for me, I would probably create a scorecard of those 5. If I think about this deeper, there might be 1 or 2, and score every single person. And if they're not at least above a like proficient, acceptable level on all of those, I would not hire them. Because I will say, but going back to the original point, I've hired a lot of people from Ivy League schools who are not very smart. I've heard a lot of people from Google and Facebook who are not very smart. Like I don't know how they got to those schools, but they like I will tell you my experience has been there's a lot of people that look amazing on paper, but at the end of the day, and I think the reason why intelligence is important is if they don't display excellent judgment, it's going to be a problem. I don't want to hover over people. This goes back to micromanaging, right? I want to have teams that I trust. I want to have teams where, like, if I'm not in the room, I trust you to make that call because your judgment is good, your critical thinking is good. And for me, I start feeling my micromanaging tendencies start to come out when I have team members where I'm like, why did you make that call? That was a really bad decision. Yeah.
That is super relatable. Madison, let me know that we are almost out of time. So I do want to open it up for questions if anyone has any. And also, Madison, there might be some virtual questions. I don't know. I can't see on the screen here.
Hi, I'm Namrata. This was absolutely fascinating. I've been actually this past 2 days, some of these last sessions have been the most fascinating ones. Thank you for all the information and all, and all the personal experiences that you shared, because as somebody who's potentially going to be a new founder, this is very important information. So I have a two-parter question. One is touching on the cultural side, right? So when you talk about the culture of a company, having been been on the higher, or rather on the hired side of a C-level, C-level, or rather having been a C-level person myself, when I was interviewing at a startup, there was one incident that comes to mind where I feel like either I ignored all the signs or I didn't see them, but it didn't last very long, and I'll tell you, and this is where the second part comes from, because what they termed as culture of the company was really tagged to what you were speaking to, which is, does everybody get along? And there was a certain way to get along. If you didn't get along, if you didn't like, and Diane, speaking to you when you said, you did the parties, or you did the all sing to you, or you sing for us, it was kind of one of those scenarios where what you had to do to fit in wasn't something I was comfortable with. And when you don't do that, you're seen as not being a team player, when really, no, there are many ways, there are other ways we could get along. So that's one thing, where it made me feel uncomfortable as a new employee, on the C-level table and an all-employee meeting. You put me on the spot and ask me to do something that I'm really not comfortable with. And I'm a very confident person. So, so you kind of had me on the back foot there. So that's one thing. The second thing is I totally missed the signs of what the true culture of the company was, right? While they had the outward looking, face of it was all of this. We have fun, we do this, we get along, we openly disagree, and so on and so forth. But there could be no open disagreement. Like when I actually was there on the ground, you talk about, and so this is a founder-led company. Oh my, I didn't last there beyond 90 days, right? Because that was just bad culture, right? Because of how the company was run. Everybody spoke against each other's backs. People were just throwing people under the bus, just so bad, right? Toxic. So the two parts of that is, if I am interviewing at these firms, how do I weed out some of these things, or what are some things to look for? That's part A. And part B is, if I'm to be a new founder, which I might be, what do I keep in mind when I'm setting culture so it can be inclusive? Those are really my questions.
Well, to suss out the culture, I think you got to talk to employees and say, what's it really like to work here? And I've always found that there's a difference between, all the stuff people say, but to find out what's not negotiable, right? I mean, in my company, the one that we grew pretty fast, what was non-negotiable was that you had to be obsessed with our customers. It had to be the priority. That if the customer, and that played out in lots of different ways. But there were times when people would say to me, this company is like so obsessed with its customers that it's like, it's driving me crazy, right? Like, what about me? Or, da, 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 da. But, I knew what was happening on the other end. Like, I had competitors saying to me, Diane, I tell my sales force not to call on your clients because they love you so much. It's like a cult, right? So it was critical it was a critical source of competitive advantage to us. Non-negotiable. If you didn't want to work in a company where the customer was the primary thing, best of luck. So I think that's part of it, is just asking what really matters here. right? And what's beneath the surface of we all get along with each other.
Yeah.
And I think, for you and how you do that, I mean, you can't say at your first staff meeting, you've got to sing us a song. You got to give them, you got to give them an out. You got to say, or, here's
Right.
another choice, particularly because singing a song has nothing to do with what's really important, in the organization. So I think you've got to look inside and just decide what really, really matters to you. And some of that should be what matters to you because it's critical to your business moving forward. I mean, you don't say, I want to really, really care about customers because it's some, mindless rallying cry that sounds really good and that you picked out of a textbook. But if it's a critical part of your competitive advantage, that would be different. So and the other thing I'd say is you can always get a coach. There are lots of really great coaches in Boston, who can kind of sit with you as you work this through. And sometimes if you really have big dreams, it's worth giving yourself a present.
Thank you.
I had two thoughts there too. So interviewing is a funny thing because I have found that people, on the employer side, can sometimes lie through their teeth. Like someone, like their job, the unfortunate reality is the the employee or the interviewer has more loyalty to the company than to you, this random person that they spoke to 30 and met 30 minutes ago. And so like, and I've committed this too. Like I've been asked, what's it like to work here at a place that I did not like very much, and I was on my way out. And I was like, it's great. I couldn't say anything else, right? It would get back to the hiring manager. Like it was, my loyalty was to myself and protecting myself. And so I found, but I think Diane is right that like employees on the ground are the best source. I find back channel references are the most useful because then if you're asking directly from someone you met in the interview process, it's like there's going to be a bias. If you're able to that your neighbor's cousin's sister works there and you can find a neutral way to them, those are much more likely to be accurate and true because it's going to be anonymous. I think the second thing, I'll keep my point short, I know we have a few minutes, is there's a lot of conversation, I think, in tech nowadays around interview bias, where employers will talk to and interview a candidate and there'll be a lot of bias, racial, gender, things that can cloud your judgment. And I think all those things are true. There's not enough conversation about bias the other way around, which is sometimes candidates, when they are really excited about a company or product, they will have blinders on and ignore the flags.
Right.
I committed this myself. There was a company a few years back where I loved the product. It was the space I want to be in. And I ignored all the cultural flags. Along the way, there are people who would say things about the CEO saying, yeah, people complain about him, but I think he's fine. Like there were these little cues that I chose to ignore because I just so wanted to work at this company. I'm sure everyone here can guess it. 3 months in, I was like, oh my God, I made a horrible decision. And I look back and I was like, wow, the signs were all there. But I chose to be biased because I still wanted to be here. And so I think the key is to really identify those, enter these conversations truly trying to be open around fit. Like, is this the right place for me? Not trying to convince yourself this is the place you want to be or this is the place you should be at. So.
Thank you very much for that.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm Gerard Eldering with Perfusion Medical. Can you guys comment on the decision between fixing an employee and firing an employee? And for context, my wife would tell you that I'm too picky, too discriminating, too critical of the employees working for me. But the problem in the startup realm is we don't have room for weakness. If I've got a person doing the FDA filings who's a 75% performer, they get 10% of their work wrong, we're dead.
Yeah.
We can't afford that. So any comments on making those decisions?
I'll jump on this one. So I'm gonna tell you this, although this might be a completely different perspective. I like to find talent within the people, whether I'm a startup, and I already have another startup happening this with a marketing company. I'd rather find a non-performer who's talented and invest a year into them, into making them want to become top performers instead of firing those people. Mistakes will happen. There's nobody perfect. If there's 75%, they're great. You just gotta pull another 5% out of them. So there's a responsibility on both sides.
I will
I
just,
really f-
sorry. You can go ahead.
I feel your pain. I mean, I've always been the exact same way. My bar is so high. People used to say things to me like, Diane, nothing's ever good enough for you. You know, when I decided to leave my company, I took somebody from my leadership team and I put them in charge. And I remember one of my employees, I mean, she was just like sobbing. She was apoplectic that I was leaving. And I said to her, this is unbelievable that you're crying. Like a week ago, you were in my office screaming, nothing's ever good enough for you. I think you have A players, B players, and C players. Your C players are not making it happen. Out. That's pretty easy. Your A players transform you from the minute they come into your company. It's like everything is better. You never worry about delegating to them. They change everything. Your B players are the killers.
Yeah.
You try and try. You give them a coach. You give them a developmental experience. You shift their job responsibilities around a little and everything. You know, they're good for the culture or whatever else. And I think it's a huge drain. And in most circumstances, I would say when I let my B players go, if I could find an A player to replace them, it was the greatest thing I ever did. Right? Because it used to make me crazy. And, you know, I think they just were going to be really great performers somewhere else. So I don't know what your particular situation is, but I think you got to sometimes just bite the bullet.
All right. Unfortunately, we are at time. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your time.